Today is also exceptional because we are very, very delighted to receive here a distinguished researcher, highly prolific, absolutely energetic, who has kind of agreed to share his research work with us. I'm talking about the speaker of the day, Dr. Ismael Mourifié. First of all, by way of introduction, I could say a good friend. Okay, but I continue also give his academic credentials. He's a associate professor at the University of Toronto. But he's also rubbing shoulders with the great and good among the research fraternity globally. He's a faculty research fellow in labor studies at the National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER, which is a prestigious global institution in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He's also a member of the Early Childhood Interventions Network at University of Chicago. Among also his many affiliations, of course, is that he plays leading role within the Econometric Society, especially the Africa region, where he's serving on the steering committee. His research interests are in microeconometrics, especially to do with the identification issues in incomplete models, causal inferences, policy information, empirical matching models like what he's going to share with us in a moment. And because of that, he has hit the topmost journals in our profession. His work has been published in, for example, the Journal of Political Economy, which is a top star journal, Journal of Labor Economics, Review of Economics and Statistics, Journal of Econometrics, Biometrica. And not only that, he's actually leading the process of dissemination by serving, energetic and an associate editor at a number of journals, not one, but a couple of these. I don't know why he gets the time, but basically that's what is it most of the time. The Journal of Econometrics, the Journal of Business, Economics and Statistics, the Annals of Economics and Statistics, and that's, the journals where he's, associate editor. And his work has attracted the highest attention and award. In 2017, he was the recipient of the John C. Polanyi Prize in Economic Science, which is most sought out and highly recognized. Maybe could also take this opportunity, if Ismael doesn't mind, for me to go back to his roots. He's very much originally from Côte d'Ivoire in Abidjan, and there is a couple of people here from Côte d'Ivoire in this meeting, as you can see. And he received a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics from University Sid Ben Abdallah in Morocco in 2005, quite recently, and then an MSc in Statistics from ENSEA in Morocco. This is another center of excellence. Those centers of excellence are funded by the World Bank in Morocco, in Abidjan, so forth. And then a PhD in economics from the University of Montreal in 2014. And also, I should add very briefly that he's a member of the Kuma Tree meetings together with Nyako and a couple of people. So I think we are very, very, very fortunate and honored today to have you, Ismael, to share your work with us. In terms of housekeeping, let me say that please, all participants to mute your audio so that there is no background noise. And then post all the comments and questions in the chat room. And then at the end of the day, you can use the button of raised hand to then make your comment, and then we can have a smooth interaction. Ismael, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Victor, for this too kind, introduction. I was not really sure that this was reflecting myself, but I am very happy to be here today, and very happy, to be invited by Victor, because I remember when we were I was starting my PhD, we have some kind of the whole African model that was like Victor, Yao, Leonard. And then, now it's very nice that, to see Victor, to work with him, that, I am very happy, very happy. Thank you very much, Victor, and particularly for all the help and the work that you are doing for young scholar through the different young African scholar through the different channel. Thank you very much. We really do appreciate that, and look forward for our work in the African Econometrics Committee. Okay, so I will try to present this paper, which is joined with a bunch of colleagues, as you will see, because it's kind of very ambitious type of work. And I don't know up to where I could be able to present, but I will try my best to present what we have. And then all your question, comment will be very welcome. So it's joined with Corey Croft, which is more labor economics at U of T, and Monchan, which is at Queen's University in Ontario, and Elena, which is like at the Harris University. It's really for her that we get access to this whole data set that we're gonna use, which is a Danish data set. So what is actually what we try to do in that paper? Okay, what we try to do in that paper, we try basically, we make three important observations that happen in the world now. And then we want really to understand if we can develop an economic model that will be able to explain those elements. One of the important things is the earnings inequality that is rising. Here I put in most advanced economies, but it's also happening in our developing countries, where we have more and more kind of two class of people. There are people that become very rich, and then some people, becomes very poor. So the middle class seems to disappearing like more and more. And then this type of difference of wage across different type of worker is very important. So you see two individuals, they look very similar, same level of education and so on, but they tend to have very complete different type of earnings of salary. So the question is to try to understand why we observe this type of situation. And in the same time, more and more people are talking for different reasons why we may observe this is because of what people call the increase of concentration. So now there is this big firm. If you take Amazon, Alibaba, they have a lot of power everywhere. And then because they have a lot of power, they are able themselves to set the price on the market. So it's not really a competitive market sometimes. Now they have a lot of power, and then they becomes a kind of monopsony type of power, where they are able themselves to set the wage, you will see. And then in this type of economy, you may observe a lot of inequality because the firm basically leads kind of everything because they have too much power. So the question that we try to understand here is how what economics model we could develop that try to explain all those different elements. And now, if we have a good economic model that can explain all these three elements, we could see what are the channels where we could intervene if we want, for example, to fight against earnings inequality, something like that in the different countries. So this is the main objective of this research agenda. So I just want to speak about four elements that people have been using in that literature in the economics theory quite a lot to try to explain why people have different earnings, even if they look similar. One thing is the human capital. Meaning by human capital is like people have invest differently in education. And then because they invest differently in education, they tend to have different trajectory. So even if both have I receive a PhD, when is they gonna have a job? One gonna continue to be very prolific, and another one will not. So this may explain the different in earnings that we see. Another model which is super important is what people call the ROI model. So the ROI model basically means that any individual have different type of skill, and then they're gonna try to sort into the firm where they have their best comparative advantage. So if you look at me, I'm doing well in one particular firm, is because I have some comparative advantage in that firm that makes me being in that particular firm. This is a ROI model. The third element is what people call the compensating differential. The compensating differential is very interesting because is this point where you have two types of people because they have different background, even if they have same skills. because one have lower expectation than the others. For example, as an immigrant, I come in Canada here, and the first job when the U of T offered me a salary, I was so happy because the amount was so high compared to what I was expecting. But compared to my Canadian friend that were here, for them they may bargain the salary because it's not big enough. So we could have similar skill, but because me, I have like a good preference for Canada, I was so happy to be in Canada, I did not bargain my salary that much, right? And this is what people call compensating differential. This could potentially explain why we have like different this earnings inequality. And then the last fact is what I'm gonna call imperfect competition is when you have all those big firms that's so big like Amazon, like Google, that they can set up the wage in the market. There is no longer perfect competition. Right? So we want to develop, what we want to do in that paper is to develop actually a general model. This is what I'm gonna call a unifying theory of earnings inequality. We're gonna consider a general model that's gonna have all these key features and try to understand how all this, could participate to the contribution of earnings inequality. So this is the main goal of the paper. I will describe the model in the minute. One of things that I will not discuss here is the dynamic. So I will consider a static model, right, just for simplicity in the beginning, and then we could talk about dynamic a little bit later. A little bit. So okay, let me go to this. The method that I will present, I will come into the model soon. I'm gonna apply this to the Danish data set, as you will see. So we're gonna have a universe of the whole population in Denmark. We're gonna have all the firms, all the individual, and then we're gonna define the market by the communitism and the industry, right? And then for each of those local markets, we're gonna try to see how much power the different firms has over each of the labor market, and then depending on the characteristics of the worker, And then I'm gonna discuss some kind of the welfare and policy experiment, okay, that you will see. But I just want first to show you the model, and then after we're gonna discuss about this application. But I hope that the objective is quite clear. Okay. So let me jump the literature and then try to outline a little bit the model, the way that it is. I know that is a global finance, thing. So I will try to move my language in the more finance. I will talk about bank. Then we're gonna have like our understanding quite well. So assume that you have like a finite number of firms, and those firms you can think in your head is completed some bank, right? Some big bank that you have, and then all the bank, okay, have a production function, okay, that I'm gonna call YJ, and then they want to hire a number of worker of type K. So when I'm called mu KJ here is a number of worker of type K that's gonna be working in the firm J, right? And then UKJ is going to be the preference that the worker of type K has for a particular firm or a particular bank. It's not a wage. For example, I really like to work in Abidjan because Abidjan is my hometown, and the African Development Bank is there. So I have like higher preference to work the African Development Bank. It's not a wage, but I have a preference for the amenity. And then WKJ is a wage that me as an individual K, I will get if I am working in firm J, right? Now, K here represent the worker. So I'm gonna have a continuum of worker. So something is super important in this model is I consider that I have a continuum of worker, many worker, that I'm gonna divide in different type, and the type gonna be K, okay? Now, when I define K in two types. The K bar is the type of the worker that me as econometrician I will observe. But K tilde is an information that the bank, when they hire the individual, will observe, but me, I will not observe. The analyst will not observe, right? So K here has two layers. One layer is observed only by me, the analyst, which is external to the model. And the second layer is observed, the two layers are observed by the bank, because the bank gonna have the K bar, you can think about the age, the country of the worker. And then the K tilde is, for example, how good the interview was. And me, I do not observe how good the interview was, but the firms or the bank is observing how good the interview was. So this is the way that we're gonna define a worker in that model. So now here I want to construct the model. So now I will look at the worker side to try to see how the worker decide to work in one particular firm or in one particular bank. So I will assume that each worker of type I has a utility for a particular firm J or for a particular bank. So this is a flow of utility. So my utility, as an individual I, my utility for the firm J is gonna have two components. A component which is deterministic, that the bank observe, which is depend to my preference of the location, for example, where the bank is. For example, I like Abidjan. And it will depend on the wage, WKJ, that the bank gonna give to me, plus a shock, something that I know but the bank does not know, right? That I'm gonna call epsilon IG. And or I may decide to not work. I may be entirely unemployed. And then if I am unemployed, my utility is gonna be just my unemployment benefit that I'm calling WK0 and a shock also. Okay, and then I'm deciding to not be unemployed. So the point is, how I gonna decide to work in one particular firm? I'm gonna maximize my utility. Okay, do not pay attention that much to the equation, but just the intuition will be fine. So what happened is I have a bunch of utility, a deterministic part and the random part, and I am maximizing over my utility, and I am looking for the bank that's gonna maximize my vector of utility. This is what the McFadden, the Nobel Prize in 1990, called the McFadden surplus, right, of the individual. Now, if you want to know how many people like more the firm J or the bank J than the bank J prime, there's a mathematical result that shows that you just need to take the derivative of that function here. So that derivative is the share of worker of type K that would like to work for a firm J. So this is what we're gonna call the share. And then the share is gonna be the labor supply, because we are in the market, right? You have the firm the worker gonna like some firm, and then the firm's also gonna like the worker. And then you're gonna have the equilibrium in some point. So here I denote by SKJ the share of work of type K that really like the bank, working in the bank J. And then the share is equal to the number divided by the number of work of type K want to work in firm J, dividing by the total number of work of type K. That's why I am rewriting this. SKJ is actually mu Kj divided by MK in the definition. So I am getting that number here. So this is on the worker side. Now let's look at the problem of the firm or the problem of the bank. So what the bank want to do, the bank have the production function, and then they want to hire people to meet at least a level of criteria of benefits that they want to get, that they're gonna call YG. But they want to minimize their wage bill. So this is the wage bill. This is the WKJ, is a wage that they will want to pay to the individual of type K and J. So they're gonna hire many type of individual, but they want to minimize this wage bill given the constraint, and the wage has always to be strictly positive. If you do so, something is very important here compared to the usual competitive market, because in the competitive market, usually the wage is set at the equilibrium. So the firm does not really minimize over the equilibrium wage, because the firms take the wage as given, right, in the equilibrium market. Here, because we consider that firm that has a lot of big power, if you take like the big central bank like that, they can even set up their own particular wage. Right? They do not have to look at what the market is going to give, because they are so powerful that they're just gonna try to minimize their own wage bill. And then something is interesting here is this mu kj here is not a constant when they're gonna do this minimization problem, because this mu kj themselves depend on the wage also, because of this what we have here before in the market share. So I will solve this optimization problem of the bank to try to see how the bank and how the firm set up the wage in the market. And this is the solution. So here I want to stop a little bit, then we have like a good understanding of what's happening. So this is the WKJ. It's going to be the equilibrium wage of a worker of type K working in the firm J, right? Or for example, in the particular bank. And you're going to have three important components. This lambda J is usually the Lagrange multiplier of that constraint here, right? Because when you do the optimization problem. And then this is what people call the marginal revenue of the output. Is, for example, when the bank gonna sell the product and get the benefits and so on and so forth, you can construct the marginal revenue of the output in the output. And this is gonna be the marginal productivity of labor. So how much a worker of type K gonna give as a productivity in one particular bank. And so, for example, Victor, when he was at the development bank, this marginal product of labor should be very high, in some senses, how much like beneficial that Victor is bringing to the bank. And one thing that happened only because we are not in the perfect competition is what we call markdown, is this term. This term is the elasticity of the labor supply. So in the perfect competition, this elasticity is infinity. So this term converge to 1 when you are in pure perfect competition. But when you are not in the perfect competition and firm has power, this term is bigger than 0. Because it's bigger than 0, you see this ratio gonna be lower than 1. Then when a firm have too much power in the country, he has this possibility to put this elasticity of labor, which is lower than 1, and then he's gonna lower the equilibrium wage that will have happened if the market was pure competition. And this is super important. It's because sometimes we really like big firms, right? Because they do investment and so on and so forth in our developing country. But when they have too much power, they have so much power now, people do not have a lot of possibility to look for different options. Right? So the only option where they have to go is to go to this particular big player. So this big player could basically lower the wage because it's the only one on the market. So that's why we call the market power. So all these big firms, those Amazon, those big firms that we have in the different countries, when they have this too much power, they will low down actually the equilibrium wage of most of the worker in the market because they have this power. So the question that I want to measure here is how much market power the firm has in Denmark, but we really want to extend this type in different countries need to see how those big firms in those different countries or those big banks, if you take, has too much power to extract, the benefits from the different worker in the model. So this is something super important that we would like to estimate in that model. One thing that is going to be is interesting is if you look at this equilibrium equation, something is very implicit because WKJ, the elasticity also depends on the WKJ. So this equation is not very a close form because it's an implicit function. Because I have WKJ here, I have WKJ here. So I have to show that what is the equilibrium of the system, if the equilibrium is unique, and so on and so forth, to try to analyze how the market behaves like in general. So I will define the equilibrium of the model as I'm gonna have a set of workers that's gonna maximize the set of utilities. They're gonna maximize their utilities, and the firm's gonna actually minimize their wage bill. So what I mean, they're gonna maximize their profit by minimizing their wage bill. And then on the both sides of the market, those two group of individuals gonna match, and you need to have what we call the population constraint, because if you take a worker of type K, it need to work in any of those firms or to be unmatched. So the summation of all this has to be equal to 1 because these are the share. So if you can find the share and the equilibrium wage that solve this, then you have an equilibrium in that model. Okay, so I will jump that, but I show that we have existence and uniqueness of the equilibrium in this type of model. And now after this, what I am interested in, just to show you, this is more microtheory type of result, is you could write down the model as a fixed point problem. As I say, WKJ is belong here, is belong here. So you want to solve that if there exists an equilibrium wage, that's gonna make this is equal to 0. So if you are working in the bank, what that means? It means that you know what is the optimal response for you that you need to give to one particular worker to be able to come in your firm. But in the other firms also, for example, the bank, the World Bank and the African Development want to hire the same person. Each of them gonna propose a particular wage, right? Equilibrium wage, and then the person gonna make the decision to come. But what I will offer if I am working in a development bank, if I do not pay attention, that is too low, the person gonna go to the World Bank, right? So this is why the tension that the bank has to solve, right, to try to be able to push individual in their particular model. Let me try to jump this. So when we do this, we solve this equilibrium model. A few things that are super interesting here. I want to know that something that I do a little bit technically, but I want just to describe the intuition. I want to know if there is a productivity shock in one particular bank or in one particular firm. Is that this productivity shock going to affect the wage in the other bank? So this is the question that we are asking if this model happens. Sometimes people may think that if I have a productivity shock in the World Bank, for example, it will not affect the wage of the individual that work in African Development Bank, for example. And here we show that no, it will affect and positively. Because what's going to happen is if the World Bank has a productivity shock, because they have the productivity shock, they will be able to hire more good people. So the African Development Bank, because they want to avoid that the World Bank that got the productivity shock push their good worker, they're going to increase the wage also in their firm just to respond to the increase that's happening in the other bank. Then we have this strategic interaction that makes that even if there is a good productivity shock in one country, in one of those big firms, this could reflect and affect the equilibrium wage in the other type of country, in the other type of bank or in the other type of firm. So this is what we show mathematically here with all our equilibrium. One thing that was not very clear is what we call the shock in amenities. Because the shock in amenities is assume that, for example, there is something that is happening in, okay, let me take the example of the development bank that when you move from Abidjan to go to Tunisia, right? So what happened here is we get a productive amenity shock in Abidjan, right? What happened, there is a political coup, and then it was like the shock. So this is the amenity shock. So the question is like, what will be this amenity shock on the equilibrium wage, right, of the individual? Is that going to increase or decrease? It turns out that in our model is a little bit unclear, right? Because when you have a productivity shock in the development bank in Abidjan, you may think, oh, maybe World Bank gonna take advantage of that because all the good people in African Development Bank gonna say, okay, it's very chaotic in Abidjan, and then they will move to Development Bank, to the World Bank, for example, in Washington, D.C. But this is not what will happen necessarily. The reason is this following. When we're gonna have the amenity shock in one particular, in the African Development Bank there, what's gonna happen, the African Development Bank realize that there is an amenity shock. So they will try to complement the amenity shock by increasing the wage. in their own, because they know that they got the shock and some people this, and they will try sometimes to increase the wage to avoid the other firm to be pushed, right? To avoid the other firm to push their worker. So we're gonna have an equilibrium effect, which is not necessarily necessarily a positive or a negative shock. It's gonna really depend on the primitive of the model. Okay, so let me jump that. So what I will try to do here, and I want you to show some of the results, but I hope that we get the big picture of what we want to do. So I will try to set up a little bit to try to show you the production function that we want to estimate, and then the utility that we want to estimate, and then I will show you some of the results that we get on the markdown using on the market power in the Danish context. So I will assume that the production function of the firms or the bank has this particular form. So here, mu kj is my number of workers of type K working at the bank J. And then here I use that form to say that every type of worker K may have a relative different contribution, right, to this firm J. And also the marginal productivity of labor could depend on the type. So sometimes that's why I have this rho K here. So some type of the worker could be very productive. So when you increase, some of the type of the worker could be not very productive. And the alpha J here is basically capturing if we have complementarity or not among the worker, or if it's more substitute, the worker are more substitute. And then here, this is my utility, and there is a log here, sorry that I forgot. And this is my elasticity function. As soon as that you assume that the shock here, the distribution is logit, right? So, or extreme value type of distribution on the shock. This is what people use in general. So I want to identify all those parameters. And once all these parameters I identify, I will basically try to see or to estimate actually the model that we do have. Okay. So let me jump here. That it was like a little bit technical. Believe me, we could estimate all that parameter. I will not go in all that math. I think it's not the purpose of that talk. Is like to show the general picture of what we do in that paper. Okay, so if you want during the question you want me to go in more detail into the mathematical part, I will be happy to go back. But I really want to give the big picture of what we want to do. And also, even if we wrote this paper in terms of like the idea, because we want to analyze the whole Danish market. Actually, if you have a data for any country that you think that we could apply the methodology, I will be very happy. It's just I use the Danish data because it was a good data set for us to apply our methodology. And so this is, and then if you think that it could be applied also to different setup, I will be very happy to see your thought about that. So we're gonna consider the Danish data. The Danish data is fantastic because you have like you could get access of the all firm that you have in that country and all individual in that population. So we have the full population of individual in Denmark. And here we're gonna select the subsample in Denmark of 80 million of people, of 8 million of people. Why? What is the remaining? So the remaining are the kids that are lower than 16 that do not work. And then we also exclude the part-time workers. So we really want to keep on the full-time worker. So we have the full-time worker, and then we have the unemployed, okay, individuals that have not been working. And then I'm gonna define a local market. So a local market is gonna be the community zone times the industry. Okay, so what is important in defining the local market is because you want to know every individual could not necessarily move every time they got an offer, right? So for example, if you have a couple, they get an offer in another city. For example, if you are in London here, there, and then you get an offer in Toronto, your decision to move is gonna be a little bit complicated, right? So your market is defined a little bit in the geographic kind of level. That's why we are basically defining the market like that. And then we're gonna partition the worker in different observable group like age, education, and gender. Okay, so in our data set here, this is an interesting part. This is the share of the population in each of those categories. So those are the male and those are the female. In the Danish population, you will see that for each of those intersections, the share of the male in general is higher than the share of the female. So meaning that in general, we have among the full-time worker, the male is in higher proportion in Denmark, right? This is a PhD level, this is a college education level. And now what I am interested to estimate is that element that we call the markdown. So the markdown, remember, is how much power the firm has to set up the wage, right? So how much power the firm has, because individual do not have many options, right? Seeing that in that way. So when this is big, I want you to read that table here that I have here. Keep this in mind. When this is big, it's beneficial for the worker because you are getting closer to the perfect competition. But when this is low, it means that it's not the individual may have lower salary, not because it's not productive, but just because the firm where he's working is so dominant that the firms could impose their salary to this person because this firm does not have many competition, right? So now let's look at the table here. If you look at the person that are younger, 20 to 34, you see that their markdown is bigger than the person that is that have older age, and is bigger than the person that are very much older, between 50 and 64. So what that means, the firms take advantage more from the person that are older than the younger person. And then you can see this for the male, and then you can see that for the female. You see this because that line is dominate that line, and this is dominate that line. And what is the reasoning? Is because when people are older, sometimes it's very difficult for them to move because they bought the house, they have like the family. So even if you give them an offer in another district, because assume that you live in Abidjan and there is only one big firm that in Abidjan that could hire you. You could be good and someone wants to hire you in Benin, but you do not want to move because of all your responsibility that you have. Then because your firm knows that it's going to be very high for you to take another offer, the firm will not necessarily increase your wage as they do. They do have to increase your wage because they know that locally you do not have many type of options. And this really happens when people are getting older. One thing that is important also is if you look at the individuals that have higher degree of education, the firm has less power on them, right? Because this is dominate this is dominate this. So what that means is when people have higher level of education, they have more flexibility to move a code. There are more options, actually, what's really happened. And because they have more options, if you do not pay them well, they will be able to move. But people who do not have good education, you see that they is much lower than here. That was if you were here, right? And if you put that this is in an African context, that I think is super important, is what's going to happen is if all those big firms come in Africa in general, if we have very low educated population, the firm will highly take advantage of them because they know that those persons that are not very well educated do not have many type of option to move away. In that case, sometimes some policy will be to try to fight against some of the big firms to introduce a little bit some competition, then to give some possibility to your low skill worker to have more options on the market in order to be able to compete and then to improve the equilibrium wage. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense that when we're gonna come to the question section. So one thing that I want to do here is, okay, let me try to explain why I have this graph. So in many papers before our paper, when people try to estimate this markdown in the population, most of this paper that has been done by Card, the Nobel Prize actually, Card has this paper on that, it basically assumed that this markdown is constant. When it's assumed that it's constant, it means that it's the same for men, women, it does not change with everything. So this is exactly what, this is the paper of Card, this year Nobel Prize. So when he estimates this markdown, he estimates this markdown only with that part by neglecting that the firms has a lot of power. Right? So he's neglecting this part. So he has a tendency to overestimate the wage markdown. So what I will do here, I will construct that curve that divide the card markdown that he construct over my markdown to see what is the level of overestimation of the markdown that card has relative to our paper. And what we see is when something is super interesting is when there are a lot of firms in the market, like 50,000. If you take in Denmark, this is Copenhagen. In Copenhagen, there are so many firms that almost the markdown is, things are coming to one. There is no overestimation, meaning that when there's many firms on the market, there is a good competition in the market, and there is no firm does not take that many advantage from the competition. Okay, then things are getting okay, and then they are converging to one. But when we are in the small market, okay, for example, a market with 5 firms, okay, you see that there is a good overestimation of the markdown. So let me be very precise when I represent that graph. So this is an interesting graph that I want to spend a few time on, some minutes to discuss that, is what we do. I construct the markdown for the different type of the population, right? So this is the red are the women and the black are the male. And you have to see in that way. When it is high, it means that there is higher markdown, right? There is higher markdown, meaning that the firms has more power, okay? There's lower markdown, the firm has more power, there's lower markdown. And when it is low here, the firms has less power. So what that means is it seems that the firms has much more power on the women in general, because this is red, than the men. And this is an interesting question, is because you could ask the question, but why firms has extract too much power from the woman compared to the male? Is this one important reason is because women are actually more reluctant to move, particularly when they are married. And so you could give to them an offer, even if you are the good, but they will not move because they want to stay because of the family and because of this husband. And this is well known in the literature. And it seems that firms are taking a lot of advantage of that because they know that. So I want to hire 2 persons, a woman and a man. The firms could basically offer, even if they have the same skill, offer the lower wage to the woman, because for him, the woman will accept this because they will not reject the offer because they can move to other, they will be unlikely to move in another city, for example. But he may worry that if he offers lower wage to the male will decide, for example, to move, right? To go in other city, to look for different prospects and so on and so forth. So clearly, the firm are taking advantage of that. And this is very important because if you want to fight against like wage discrimination across, gender and so on and so forth, this is something that you have to look into it, because you may try to say that you should impose to the firms to offer the same wage to the people with same skill, whatever the gender. it is, right? Otherwise, clearly, even in Denmark, which is a developed country, the firms tend to take very important advantage uh, of the type of worker that they realize that they are not moving, um, that are not moving very much. So I think this is a general picture that I think I will prefer to discuss a little bit about what you think in the model, but this is the type of thing that we do. We do not have all the results because one of my objectives was to show how the different competing theory could explain the wage inequality, but we did not get all the estimation yet, so I will not be able to present that to you. But I think I will try to wrap up here and then to let you know to the discussion. So this paper is basically trying to develop a theoretical model. So I'm a little bit on the theory side to try to explain some kind of earnings inequality that we see in the population. And it has this advantage of combining very different mechanisms. And one of the important mechanisms that's going to be important for us is what we're going to call the market concentration. Okay, that way to see how much, when the firms, there's only a few firms that are in the market, in the particular market, how they can take advantage of that to extract all the benefits from the worker, because they know that they are the only player in the market. The worker cannot go somewhere else, and they use this type of of intuition to be able to low down the equilibrium wage. And this, I think, is very concerning for the country, for the different country, because in that type of situation, is because we are moving away to the perfect competition, sometimes some regulation may be needed. Because if you run a particular labor market where you see there is one particular dominant firm, and this firm taking advantage from his like the fact that he has a lot of power to propose lower wage, sometimes the planner should intervene in this type of market, right? It should probably impose some minimum wage. And sometimes the minimum wage should not, one important thing that we want to highlight, the minimum wage should not be a global minimum wage, but the minimum wage could be a type minimum wage. So we could have like a minimum wage for high skilled worker, for PhD, for master, to have very different type of like minimum wage that's going to be time specific, in order to avoid that those big firms extract all the share from the different worker. So thank you very much. I will stop here, and then I will be happy to answer all the questions.
Oh, thank you so much, Ismael. I use the chat. Yeah, this is the chat symbol for the to congratulate you on this wonderful presentation. The mathematics were very difficult, but your presentation makes it so easy and straightforward to present complex ideas in such a simple manner. That's really appreciated. And I think you have a very good talent of doing this. And interestingly, such that it is appealing to the listeners. So I don't see any posting in the chat, but what I will do is that I will now open the discussion. If you see on top, there is for participants, there is where you can show your hand. Just let me use mine now. Yeah, just like that. Okay, as I've done for me. So if you have any question, please put up your hand, and then I can invite you to ask the question. Maybe as you formulate your question, let me, appreciate the work and that Ismael has shared with us, and also at answering some of the questions that really are very complex and are producing a very strong analytical framework. Earnings inequality, yes, I think is a big challenge. In fact, there is a challenge that I have always thought about, but maybe I don't have enough labor economic skills to analyze it, which is the fact that for many workers in developing countries, they don't earn a living wage. Okay, there is such a disparity. If you get, say, civil servants in the US, civil servants in the UK, and civil servants, say, in a DRC, or taking a country in Africa, there is huge inequality variations. But not only that, the challenge is you find a civil servant earning a salary of $500 per month, but actually the cost of living for his expenses is £2,000 per month. Two challenges: one, where does the $1,500 come from? And two, what can it be? So some of those challenges are there. So you have a very huge kind of research agenda. I suppose one of these, some modifications in these models can go into look at the type of farms that exist in African economies, for example, and the type of workers and skills and so forth that can explain this. Maybe it's human capital differences. Maybe you can track it down to a ROI model. Maybe you can look at comparative differentials. Maybe you can look at productivity differences. For sure, you are absolutely right to say that the marginal productivity of labor of myself at the African level was high. And when I moved away from the African level, it failed disastrously. And I'm still in a misery from that move. And now, a couple of questions, maybe, while my colleagues are think about it. I was trying to look for and maybe it's not fair to kind of ask what is not in the. I was trying to look for the role of expectations in your model. Okay, because expectations may be heterogeneous. Different firms may have different expectations. Different individuals, workers may have different expectations. Whether they are rational or adaptive, but maybe there are reasons why expectations might end up messing your model or not adding additional insight, and therefore is addressed. Or maybe it's there, and because I haven't read the paper, it's okay, maybe I didn't pick up on the expectations. So that is my question number one. The second point, I'm going to look at UK data, because I know that some of the guys, especially at UCL, have been working around on huge data sets of farms and workers, employee kind of employee type of matching. I'm going to see a company, but I'm going to check on that, and maybe I can take that up with you bilaterally.
Sure.
My other point is my limited knowledge of labor markets is that they have a high degree, a high tendency not to clear. Okay, market clearing may not work, and so therefore the wage determination problem becomes an issue. Whenever I'm doing some work, say combining production functions with wage, with the labor markets to derive, aggregate supply and prices formation on the supply side, I always have to contend and say this is a very unrealistic assumption for me to say that the labor market clears. Okay, in your specification, therefore, does the labor market clear? Okay. So,
yes.
My theoretical way of combining the production function labor market is very simplistic, and then embedding money markets for me to get how a money supply can impact prices. That's another point. Yeah, and my final point is about the role of the role, say, of a transaction costs, and in particular, the differences in taxes, maybe across firms. So this may be working around with the Danish data. Maybe they would be subject to different tax regime, tax rates. I know tax rates are step functions, and therefore it becomes very difficult to find the marginal thing. But if there are any transactions in terms of taxes, or even the cost of moving, from one employer to another, like FDB, it's a tax-free zone. So therefore, even if I move to another, so I get it, that would jeopardy. So a transaction cost, maybe of course there are reasons why this is not included. Okay, so I stop there with possibly those three comments. Yeah.
Wow, that are three fantastic questions. I took a note here and then I will try to answer one by one. The
Okay.
first one is this rational expectation in that model.
Yeah.
I totally agree. Okay, one thing that I take a stand to is I consider that worker has perfect information about the potential equilibrium wage that they're gonna have. And this is what like the WKJ. So they know exactly what they're gonna have. So they are very deterministic on that. But what you highlight is a very important point, is because we could have like, in practice, this is not the case. Because when people are going on the labor market, they even don't know necessarily the potential equilibrium wage that the person gonna propose to them. So I think I thought the model was already a little bit complicated, but we can definitively try to add uncertainty on the WKJ, the equilibrium wage, in the worker side. So basically, they're gonna maximize this expectation of the flow utility, which is gonna be themselves an expectation relative to what the firm's gonna offer to them. But what's the most important question that you ask is about, because we could have heterogeneity on this expectation, and heterogeneity on this expectation could be one important could explain this, this wage inequality also, because different expectation could lead to different type of of equilibrium wage. So I think this is a very well taken point that I need to have a word on that and try to see how I can incorporate this in that model. The second point is about market clearing. This is a fantastic question. It is every time that I am like talking with like some macro people, and all these questions are coming, because if you take the root of your fellow at UCL, which is Richard Blondel, and all these Jean-Marc Robin and so on, they will tell me, they will go to the search model and they say that Ismael, there is always friction, and then people like always search within the model, and then the market is never necessarily clear. In the one way that we see in more traditional labor without search is to say, you know what, all this unclearing part, we're gonna put that to the part that people are unemployed, and then they just prefer, unemployment, and then this unemployment becomes, take, all this part of this no market clearing that you have been pointing out. But this is one particular direction that we should refine, I think, and Turkey, yes, is an important way to take the root of this. And the last one, I think this is a fantastic comment about the transaction cost and the taxes. I thought about a lot about that, because this is super important. The way that, because particularly the taxes, is you're gonna move like in a very distorted way. So, and the tax gonna really affect the way that the firm's gonna set up the equilibrium wage. So this type of transaction cost is really important. I think it's something that we could definitively introduce in the model. I will not tell you in which direction things gonna go, because the tax basically really changed in the nonlinear way the pricing schedule. but it's something definitively that we should do, particularly if you want to apply also to some of those different country that you're going to have, where maybe the taxation, could be very different from the type of worker. Okay, I think those are two excellent points that, I will think into it and try to see how we could really incorporate that in the model.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much, Ismael, for engaging with those discussions. I think it's sort of the saying that, once the work is developing, there are ways. Maybe they don't fit in this paper. Maybe they will be coming in the next paper, and the prolific way in which you are generating one paper after another, I would not be surprised to see it in paper number 2.
That's true.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I see a hand from Athena. Athena is a postdoc research fellow in the Center for Global Finance at SOAS. Athena, please go ahead.
Yes, hello Ismael, and thank you for your presentation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Athena.
I just wanted to ask you if you could elaborate a little bit further on the matching technique that you have used. So what is the matching estimator that you're using in the paper? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I try to, because it was a general audience, so I do not really spend a lot of time. There are two things that is important here in the matching type of literature. Is on one side you have those firms, and then on the other side you have those workers, right? And then the equilibrium wage that you observe, which is WKJ, is constructed by the preference of the two sides of the market. Right? The side of the market. Now, when you want to identify the parameter of the model, that I did not spend that much on that, you have really to be careful, right? Because if you want actually to identify the type of the worker, the equilibrium wage is not defined only by the preference, but is defined also by the firm that we have in the other side on the market. So to be able to identify your parameter, you're going to fix a worker. Let's fix a worker K. And then at the period I, you're going to be at the period T is going to be in the firm G. And then the period T plus 1 is going to be in the firm G prime, because it's going to move from one firm to other firms, right? So when you see this change in the distribution of matching, because it's matching the chair, you could use the variation in the change to be able to see how good this particular worker is. You take a particular worker, is going from firm J, J prime, JX, and so on. And for each of firms where he's going, is keep getting a very high wage. This is say something on the individual ability of that firm. So the fact that he get high wage in the firm J does not mean that it's only the firms that is too good. It's potentially this one that is too good. That's why he's getting, high wage everywhere where he's going, right? But you can take another individual that is not necessarily super good, but he match with, for example, the World Bank or the African Development that have high wage. You're going to have high wage once. But as soon as you change his match, he may no longer have the high wage. So what we use the change in the distribution of match over time, or over a period, to try to be able to recover the skill pattern, okay, of the worker in different level. And then we do this for the worker side, but we will do this for the firm side too, because you take a firm, he has a bunch of workers and he's very productive. And when he change a little bit in the next period, the type of worker, is no longer productive as before. So you will see, okay, maybe this firm does not have a fixed effect of being a strong firm, but it's because he has maybe 2 or 3 big leaders at that period that was making this. So the change in the match distribution, because the match distribution is going to be the type of work of type K that's going to match with type of firm J at every period. So we're going to look at the distribution of that match and try to recover from the distribution of the match what is the worker type and what is the type of firm that we have. Does that make sense to you? one of the techniques that we use is gonna be is a K-mean technique by Bonhomme, Lamadon, and Menreza at Econometrica 2017, where they really formalize this concept of using, you know, the matching employer-employee wage to be able to recover the distribution of the skill of the worker. Does that make sense to you, Tina?
Yes, Ismael, thank you very much. So basically, your matching accounts for both individual characteristics and firm characteristics, right?
Exactly, exactly.
Okay, right. Thank you very much. No, this is very interesting. Is your paper available online so that I can have a closer look?
We are finalizing the empirical part. As soon as it will be done, I will definitively share that with
with me and Meng. Yeah.
Victor and Meng. Then
excellent, excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
And then we can be able to distribute it. Yeah, absolutely. That's very, very helpful. So thanks again, Asina, for exploring that methodological angle. I'm just looking at the any hand up, any questions, point of discussion, views, observations. I suppose. Okay, so maybe just before we conclude, you may want to tell us a little bit, Ismael, about the journey for this paper in terms of what you are doing, and then we will look forward to sharing it with the colleagues here. Sometimes, yes, it is always that after the seminar, a number of people who participated, ask for copies of the paper. And those who would have wanted to participate, but teaching and other responsibilities stood in their way, they always ask for the recording. So, and we think we can share with them the recording that Meng is looking after now. But if you could tell us a little bit about, how you see yourself moving forward with this paper, then we can have that information as well for, yeah.
So first of all, I think I will be happy to share the slide also to Meng, so she can send the record and then the slide, and then as soon as the paper is available, we're gonna basically try to send that. I think there are two things that is important. So the theoretical framework that we propose here is a little bit large, as you see, to try to contain many types of competing. But I am not necessarily sure that each of those mechanisms are so important in each of those different countries. So what I am trying to see if I can explore is if we could use that framework to be able to apply this to the different environment. Right. For example, I will be very interesting to see, for example, how, because now we see that in Africa, there are more and more those big players that are coming to the market. So try to see in different contexts, what kind of how the parameter gonna looks like, how we could, if those are some particular impact. I really want to see on the more policy side, actually, how this paper could be applied. It's true that I am a methodologist, but in general, after doing the methodology, I think it's good to see where things could be applied. Here, we had access to this Danish data that we're very happy to try to apply our method, but I will be very interesting to see where we could kind of applying that in different contexts. To me, it's a super important question, because if we really want to fight about earnings inequality, we need to know exactly what are the important drivers of earnings inequality, right? And in Africa, the driver of earnings inequality could be completely different from the driver in North America or in Europe, right? So be able to use this framework in the more African context is going to be something super important to me. Then to try to really understand what are the main drivers of inequality. And based on that, we could think a little bit about better type of policy that could be used to try to fight against this earnings inequality that might happen.
Thanks very much, Ismael. Actually, that's absolutely interesting. that at one point you'll be taking excursion into the policy dimensions of these research issues, because they are important, both in terms of public policy set by governments, but also in terms of company or corporate policy that CEOs would like to set with respect to the wage differentials in various sectors, and maybe outside one country, outside like Danish data you're looking at, outside one country, there are possibly related questions that would be very important. Say one is looking at Africa, what has happened in the last 20 years because of globalization is the increasing scale of international companies, multinationals playing an important role in each country, and then these multinationals able to pay a higher wage than the ones previously set by governments, and thereby which of course workers enjoy. They get more skills, they get more money, and maybe how has this changed the entire dynamics of our thing. So that I suppose I could think of it so many ways, but yes, the policy angle would always be interesting. However, you are starting from the strong foundation, the framework and the theoretical part of that framework has to be kind of very clear and solid if a policy has to be informed. Otherwise, it will be just policy, plucked from the air, which has been Africa's problem for many years. So yes, we'll continue to watch this space, Ismael. We thank you so much for introducing us to this problem, motivating us and clearly setting out a framework that we can follow, and taking interest in those areas, some who are working in that area and some who are not. It's equally interesting. And basically, that's what a good research seminar is all about, whetting the appetite to get interest and so forth, and taking it from there. So, we are eternally grateful. Thanks so much. So on behalf of the group here, let me invoke this applause button, which all of us, and I can see a number of people also applauding. Thank you very much. Thanks indeed.
Thank you very much, Victor. It was a pleasure, and really happy to help anytime.